All right, so welcome back to Morning Express. Time now for a newsroom chat. And in studio with us this morning to discuss matters IEBC, EACC, as well as matters NASA, Jubilee politics, and of course Mombasa Governor Ali Hassan, Joho's security, are three panelists. Many thanks for joining me in studio this morning. We have on my left Michael Meyer, who is the Dean of the School of Media and Communications at Aga Khan University. Many thanks for joining us. We also have Crispus Yankem and Patrick Gathara, who will join us in studio. Many thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
All right.
So a lot has been happening this week, especially yesterday. Today we wake up to news of the new IEBC nominees as they await, of course, the president's nod to get into office. And it was a very interesting parliamentary sitting yesterday during the approval by Parliament. Gathara, let's begin with you. It was a unanimous approval, first of all. What are your thoughts on the nominees?
Well, my thoughts on nominees haven't changed for since the last few weeks. I think there are big questions about how we ended up with this people who are as nominees, both at the shortlisting stage, where we know 720 people were removed, and we've not been told how and under what circumstances when did they decide on the 30 that they took across, and the 720 they put aside. You know. I've always been calling for the selection panel to actually publish all the minutes of its discussion so that they can be sure that the people who were put aside actually didn't merit. There's also questions about the process of selecting these ones of nomination, where we've had queries about who scored most. I think some of that was also discussed yesterday in Parliament. You know, but we are where we are. They have proposed, I mean, they've been vetted, so to speak, and been passed, and it's up to the President to appoint them.
Right. And I mean, Yankem, it's a lot in store waiting for these commissioners. Just under 7 months to the election, they have a lot of issues like polls, procurement of polls equipment. How soon do you think they should get in office and start preparing for this?
I think, like yesterday, the work is obviously cut out. But before I respond to that, let me say a few things. First of all, is actually to commend the standard for sustaining the story on drought. Because I think any leadership worth its salt at the moment, whether it is actually the opposition or the government.
All right, I understand, Yankem, there's a problem with your microphone, so we'll come back to you on that as we fix your microphone. But let's speak to Michael about the entire process of the, nominating the IEBC's or commissioners, the entire debacle surrounding what Gathara is bringing out, those 700 and something people that were locked out. Kenyans didn't quite get answers as to what criteria was used. What are your thoughts on this entire process?
Well, I'm a New Yorker, and so my obsession with politics is American, not so much Kenyan. And one of the things that strikes me as an outsider is what Crispus actually just brought up before his microphone failed. I have never seen an obsession with politics to such a degree in any country of the world, except other than Kenya. And Crispus mentions the big issue of the day, or one of the biggest issues of the day, is drought. Now, the Standard has put this on its front page a number of times in the past week, 2 weeks. It's followed the story zealously, and it's to the Standard's immense credit, because there are issues that affect everybody in Kenya and the region that often don't get reflected on the front pages of the newspapers. The obsession with politics of the most arcane sort often obscures the more serious issues, such as drought and things like that Crispus refers to.
Very interesting. All right. And let's hear from Yankem now. Your microphone seems to be okay. Your thoughts on the issue?
I think it was not a conspiracy. Anyway, thank you. Like I said, actually, the team ought to get into office like yesterday because their job is well cut out. That is the IEBC, the new nominees, Chebukati and team. But like what I said, I think let me just go back to my sentiments. That is commending the media and specifically the Standard for sustaining the story on drought. Like I said before, any leadership worth its salt, whether it is the opposition or government, ought to be stepping on the gas and ensuring that we have a proper mechanism that will actually ensure that the country does not suffer the consequences of drought and lead to massive loss of life, like what is happening right now. But let me come back to a question very quickly, because we are actually debating the IEBC and the new nominees. Gathara must declare his interest in this process, because the country ought to be moving forward. We must be a people that are forward-looking, not backward-looking, because we know the country is expectant with a lot of expectations on the new team. Yesterday, the debate in Parliament was sort of sending mixed signals, and I think the leadership of this country must move with speed and ensure that we have the new team in place. It is unfortunate, Michelle, looking at the debate in Parliament, you realize we had some sort of mixed reactions to the nominees. You remember Gumbo was talking of his constituency and specifically his tribe not being able, despite the fact that they have been able to produce the first African president or black president of the US, despite the fact that they produced the first woman member of parliament in this country. You saw even Memusi Kanchori, the MP for Kajiado Central, saying that he does not understand why Tukero Olekina was not actually the one nominated to chair IEBC, despite what we saw that he probably must have been the first person who scored the highest. You saw people like Chris Omalo saying that this is ours. The fact that Wafula Chebukati comes from my constituency or comes from my county, I think it is a matter of fact that we must be able to endorse this one. I'm looking forward, Michelle, to a country whereby we'll be able to debate people on the basis of their merit, not where they come from, on the basis of what they stand for, not who they are, on the basis of what virtues they bring to the society, not what their promises are. I think that should be a better country. And looking at the IEBC and the new nominees, I think it is incumbent upon the president to ensure that he appends his signature on the list of the nominees so that they move into office. They ensure that there is a proper policy framework that will ensure that the country actually holds the next elections in a proper manner that is transparent, that is peaceful, that speaks to the values of the nation. And as a nation, that we shall not be divided by the results at the end of the day. Yes.
And Gathara, as these nominees await the president's nod, and you're waiting to respond to what Yankem said, of course they're coming to replace the Hassan-led team that was dismissed through mass protests and whatnot, and there's a lot of issues of integrity and trust. How important would you say is the role of the media with this new incoming team in terms of, the credibility and the trust that Kenyans have on them?
Well, I'll start by declaring my interest, as I've been invited to do. My interest is as a Kenyan. I think when Mike speaks of issues that touch on everybody, elections touch on everybody. We saw it in 2008. The credibility of the election, is the one issue that has almost brought this country, finished off this country. So there, it's quite important. It's incumbent on all of us to pay heed and to pay attention to what's actually going on to ensure that the polls that we have in August, do not lead us down the path of destruction as we did in 2007. When it comes to the media, I think the media really needs to keep its eye on the ball. The problem wasn't solely with the IEBC. It's with the entire electoral system. Everything from how we register people to how they identify that the polling stations. Right now, the whole discussion of the electoral system, of manual, electronic, which was a bit I think, misguided. But it's still been sort of swept now under the carpet. Nobody's really talking about it again. And the media really needs to be pushing, to be talking about the reforms that are required so that we can have a credible election in August. And also that if any petitions come out of that, especially a presidential petition, which is mostly the most contentious, we've actually made the reforms to the system so we can deal with it and not have a situation like we had in 2013, where the court said we don't have enough time to actually listen to the petition. So I think the media needs to look at the entire system and not just be captured by the politics of things, where it's about, because the petition's interest, as I said last week, is about winning. It's not really about a free and fair elections. They will always look to where they get advantage. For the rest of us, we are the ones who really need to concentrate on ensuring that the system can actually deliver the promise that's in the Constitution for a transparent election, for a credible election, for a peaceful election. And I think that we do that by insisting, by going back. You mentioned the Isaac Hassan team, and looking at the 2013 election and asking, what went wrong there? What are the lessons to be drawn there? And not just beating the drum for the new team. I think we also need to keep our eye on them. Given the fact that they've now been vetted. I don't think we'll be reinventing the wheel. Or restarting the process all over again. But we've got to keep them under cosh. They've got to know that they're constantly being watched. Their every move is constantly being scrutinized. But if they do start playing around, making shenanigans, etc., that is highlighted early enough that we can do something about it before the election, and to ensure that
perhaps
people
I
actually
could
happy
chime
with
in
that.
here too.
Absolutely.
And again, let me take the perspective of an outsider. I've been in Kenya only about 3.5 years, so I'm not quite Kenyan yet. Getting there, maybe. As I look at Kenyan elections and the role of the media, you're absolutely right, Patrick. Any election can become ugly. Just look at the United States election and look at the divisiveness that we're seeing right now and will see in Washington just in 2 days when Donald Trump is inaugurated. The last thing that Kenya wants is that kind of ugly factionalism. Politics is always a tough game. It's a particularly tough game in Kenya. But the role of the media is not to be partisan. If the media in the 2017 election here in Kenya can not be objective so much, because it's hard to be objective, but not be partisan, to be tough, to really source our stories, to challenge candidates equally, and to not consider themselves as part of one side or another. There's a great deal of partisanship in Kenya media. If we can free ourselves of that this go round, it will be a safe election, but more than safe, it will be a good election.
Can I just interject? I think, to be fair enough to the media on this one, I think the media has been pretty well, actually done pretty well in terms of highlighting the issues that are, are associated with this particular election. Let me just bring our brother up to speed with what was here in 2007. I think that was the first time that the media in this country was a bit divided and political, so to speak. But again, when you look at it, it is not entirely problematic for the media to endorse a candidate. I'm very sure that our brother here will tell you that in the US it happens. But in 2007,
yes.
it does, and there isn't actually nothing wrong. In 2013, I think the media had learned very bitter lessons. And in 2013, they were able to try and fix the mess that was created in 2007.
Why they? Because I see Gathara really laughing about that.
He'll have his time. That essentially led to the post-election violence in 2007, 2008. In 2013, I would say they did pretty well. You remember even the presidential debate. For the first time in this country, it was actually a first of its kind. And you remember during that time, presidential candidates like the current president, the former Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, the likes of Martha Karua, the likes of Ole Kiapi, and did, they were put on the spot of what actually they stood for at that particular time. In 2017, I'm looking forward to that because as of now, we do not have presidential candidates. What we have are aspirants. We do not have governors or candidates for gubernatorial positions. We don't have candidates for members of parliament or whatever the case. So going forward, I think it is very important for us to support the media because they have done pretty well in terms of highlighting the issues. Never mind that in some instances they have gone overboard and dwelt on politics of the day that are associated with this electoral process. But coming back to IEBC, like I said before, what I want to see in the media, as soon as Chebukati's team is now sworn into office, is a one-on-one interview with the new leadership, telling us exactly what they intend to do, because we don't have time right now. We are talking of about 6 months to the next election. What policy framework are they going to come up with? Checks and balances. How are they going to ensure that they are enforcing electoral laws so as to ensure that we have sanity in this electoral process? I think those are issues that we would like to see going forward being covered by the media. The other thing is actually to step on the gas and ensure that the ongoing voter registration exercise, mass voter registration exercise, actually is contained within the laws that are enacted. Because looking at some areas, I think there are issues, important issues that are being raised as far as the functionality of the BVRs, as far as who is supposed to be supervising what. I saw in the Standard, I think yesterday, that even in some instances in Garsen, or was it somewhere at the coastal region, the IEBC clerks were not showing up. Why is it so when Ezra Chiloba told us that they are ready to ensure this exercise that is going to determine who becomes the president in the next 7 months is done in a free, transparent
fair and transparent manner. And even as Gathara respond to that, let's go back to what Yankem said. I mean, do you think that the lessons the media learned in 2007 that he says they employed in 2013 will hold for the 2017 general election?
Well, I think firstly, it's Yankem who probably needs to be brought up to speed about what happened in 2013. I mean, the media itself has admitted.
You know, Gathara is a cartoonist.
Put out there. No, seriously.
From
The media itself has admitted that its performance in the 2013 election was way below par, that they, in fact, in the words of Linus Kaikai, they over-trusted the IEBC. And there's a big problem there in the sense that when things went wrong in 2013, we weren't in a position to query them. And the fact that we waited till after 2013, after they had gone wrong, to raise it, when it was clear from way before, when they had done their tests of the BVR machines and they had failed, that was never highlighted. And here's my point, is that the media should not repeat what it did in 2013. You know, that wasn't a highlight, you know, of their time. I think the media needs right now to start inquiring into the system itself, the system of elections, which also includes the IEBC and the commissioners and what they do and the policies that they have. But to look at it as an entire process and to ask where are the gaps, where are the problems that might lead us into issues in 7 months from now, and what is being done about that. In the end, the real function of the media is to actually set the agenda, is to actually not abdicate it, because that's what they've done, is they've given it up and let the politicians kind of run with it. You know, what the media needs to do is to be articulating, here are the issues. And then you go to the politicians, to the IEBC, to whoever, and you ask, what are we doing about this, you know, in the run-up to the election? If we continue the way we are, where it is the politicians leading this, then we'll be running around in circles. We'll end up with an election in 2017 that is very similar to what we had in 2013,
right,
which was in no way a good election.
Well,
let's hear from Mr. Meyer.
I think you make a very interesting point, and both of you do. I'm very optimistic about these elections. I think they'll be relatively clean. I think they will be well reported, and those two are related. I remember shortly after arriving here in Kenya, I went into the newsroom of a major international news organization. They have a big operation here. And they were talking to me about the two elections, the first in 2007-8, the next in 2013. In 2007-8, the newsroom divided along very political tribal lines. And it was a newsroom at war, and reporters were taking sides, and they were reporting stories accordingly. Some of it was fake news, some of it was just news with a hard spin. In 2013, everyone was determined to avoid that example. And so this time, the newsroom was unified. The mantra was unity. But
peace.
The difficulty was that nobody wanted to disagree with anyone else. When nobody wanted to challenge voting results in certain areas, or were reluctant to, for fear that they would be seen as being partisan, that they might spark conflict, not only in the newsroom, but in society at large. And the editor of the time, the newsroom, said, neither one of these approaches was good. In each case, 2007-8, 2013, the casualty was truth. This time, I think newsrooms are going to be very conscious of balance, of raising issues, challenging politicians, holding people to account. They won't do it in a partisan way, I don't think, certainly not as much as in 2007-8, but more so than in 2013. So I think this will be a good election, particularly from a media perspective.
Most definitely, and I wish Victor Bwire was here to expound on the code of
We will be
conduct
joining
that
him in
is
a few
being
moments.
that is being developed by the Media Council of Kenya. And I think the Editors Guild, even the MOA, has got a responsibility in terms of ensuring that even journalists actually stick to that code of conduct, and ensuring that we as a country, we are not inflaming passions. Because in some instances, particularly those regional radio stations or tribal radio stations or vernacular radio stations, I think that they are fallen victim to so many things. They have been used by politicians before to inflame passions, and I think we need to be careful as a country going forward.
Well, I agree. I think in the sense that we do have right now at the moment, lots of the talk on vernacular radio is quite atrocious.
Right. And actually, let's bring that in, because there is a local radio station that is in trouble with the NCSC as we speak, because of a certain drive during this mass voter registration exercise, because they're encouraging people from a certain community to go out and register as voters to defend their kingdom. And this is something that has been in the limelight for a while, painting the media in not so good a light. Gathara.
Right, yeah. So I think, we've got to be conscious of those trends from the beginning and start finding ways of dealing with them. Because, as we know, lots of these vernacular stations are affiliated already to politicians, and many politicians right now are not speaking in ways that encourage unity or peace or give hope that they will temper their language going forward. So we need to be conscious of those trends. But I think one of the more important things for me, one of the really important roles that the media should play is as a check on the system. We saw in 2007 when they tried to report on the election, especially on the election results, and then when they got into conflict with what IEBC was saying, they put that aside. They stopped reporting their figures and went with what was then the EACC's figures. Same thing in 2013, where in fact, as SK Macharia said in his presentation to the Senate, that in essence they had a deal with the IEBC, where the IEBC would essentially tell them what was going on. I think it's time to do what SK Macharia said they had been doing since '92, where they keep track of what's been announced at the polling stations independently of what's going on at Bomas or at the IEBC. And then they can present this. Now, there are legal restrictions to that, and I think that needs to be discussed. Why is it that we should forbid media from calling the election? As it seems our laws have done. I think Victor can enlighten us about that. But I think we need to be in a position where when results are announced, the media acts as a system that's a check to the IEBC system, whether it's manual or electronic, doesn't matter. But the figures they give an accurate reflection of the figures given at the polling station, and one of the ways to ensure that is to ensure you've got a check on that, which is by allowing the media to actually report it from before.
I think I totally agree with Gathara on that one, because sometimes you really need to ask yourself, is it about my job or my daily bread, or is it about standing for nationhood? Journalists actually find themselves in a very difficult position between a rock and a hard place when they are going about their duties, particularly if you're working for an institution or a media house that is being run by a politician. For instance, the radio station that you spoke about, I think it is being owned by a politician. But going forward, I think it is critical. The institutions of the day, the constitutional institutions that have been put in place, talking about the NCAC, talking about even the police, talking about even MOAs and Editors Guild, I think it is incumbent upon them to ensure that they're enforcing the necessary laws that guide this particular process. And training is also very important as far as journalists are concerned, because not so many journalists are actually trained in electoral coverage. I think that is an area that we must be able to look at with a tooth comb and ensure that we have proper people covering the election.
And let's now bring in Victor Bwire, Deputy CEO at the Media Council of Kenya. Victor, many thanks for joining us. A lot has been said about the role of the fourth estate in the electoral process. Concerns have been raised here as well. Are there any measures by the MCK set to ensure that the media and journalists follow a certain code of conduct and ensure that the media is not, as Mr. Meyer says, partisan as well?
Thank you. One, quickly, and sorry for coming late.
No problem. Many thanks for joining us.
Now, one, several things are happening and have been happening. Obviously, it's not just linked to election, because at the council we don't look at elections as a special thing.
Right.
I mean, election reporting, business reporting, science reporting is the same thing. It's only the level is the mobilization and the resources that will be given the magnitude of the assignment at hand. But having listened to the discussions, one of the things that are happening is that we are not getting any specific accusations against any particular individual journalist. We are getting concerns about radio stations,
right,
vernacular TV stations and radio stations. And when you do some of the investigation, like the radio station that is being mentioned, you notice that it's not a journalist, it's an advert that was run elsewhere and it's being run. While that has also implications on the code, but purely there's no individual journalists. So we are not finding any particular journalists. Obviously, lessons of the ICC and Sang case, I mean, and individual capability for individual journalists who will mess has already been sunk enough. And journalists are very cautious of what they are doing. So most of the problems we are getting is the guests they are hosting sometimes.
Right.
The guests who come in, and obviously the discussions they hold are not very well. Now, obviously, we have required radio stations jointly with the CA I mean, discussions like this, obviously, during election might not be there. We are now calling for the delayed response mechanism, signal mechanism, so that when somebody talks something that is out of the context, then the producer could be able to deal. Right. So that is happening. It's a requirement now for the stations to have a delayed response. Two, obviously, the issue of training is there, but training has been continuous. Like this week, obviously, we are having a senior editors and media owners session, and part of it is to review the guidelines for elections reporting. There was a guideline in 2012 that was done and signed upon by all media houses to be the guiding principle, largely drawn from the Media Council Code of Ethics, which is Schedule 2 of the Media Council Act. Right. So we are not going out of the Act. But there will be now a review of the Act because quite a number of things have happened. So we are updating the guidelines. The meeting is on Saturday, actually 21st. And subsequent meetings will happen so that we have another guideline for election 2017, which then all media houses will append their signature as a document that will guide how all media houses will cover elections. Part of it, again, in addition, is that we are requiring media houses, resources allowing, to set up election reporting desks so that each newsroom has a focal point for election reporting, which then will have a series of reporters and correspondents, freelancers who would help each of the media houses in election reporting, who then will go under extensive training for election-related. We are doing election and gender responsive reporting. For all, we are targeting 3,000 journalists. Resources are already there. We are starting with a train of trainers so that we have trainers in all the 47 counties and monitors. So that is already happening just to help journalists cope with the pressure that will come. We are encouraging media houses, obviously, to have a joint approach some of these elections,
right,
so that because resources is a problem, so that each of the media house gives in their strengths to help the media houses cover election this time. We are requiring media houses, and already 2 or 3 have already developed what they are calling 10 points, what will guide the election coverage, so that we try to move away from personality-oriented coverage to issue-oriented reporting. So that is already happening. You mentioned things like 2000, there are lessons that were learned, obviously,
yes,
2013. So again, media houses are already, like KTN Standard, I know they are already installing the verifiable softwares for fake news, for related. So media houses are prepared for these elections. We know it will be pressure. Already we are talking about preparation for not just presidential debates, but gubernatorial report, debates, senator reports in a number of counties. Media houses have already mapped out. We already know counties where there's already pressure. Mombasa will be a challenge, Garissa. I mean, in terms of hotspots, again, we are requiring media houses to have safety, security measures for their journalists, already asking journalists where they feel, because previously most of the correspondents work from the areas they come from. So obviously, which sometimes makes them part-time in some of the coverage. So where those extreme cases are there, we have requested media houses to interchange some of their correspondents to move away from their what we will call home areas,
right,
so that we minimize incidents. But obviously, the journalists are individuals, so sometimes we don't have perfect individuals. So we'll have 1 or 2, 3 mistakes, but we're hoping all will be well.
And I mean, let's bring in Mr. Meyer as a media and communication expert, and in comparison with the U.S. election that just concluded, would you say the Kenyan media is doing enough previously, of course, and in this coming general election in terms of accountability for the institutions involved in the electoral process, the IEBCs, the NCICs, in terms of hate speech and whatnot? Would you say enough is being done in terms of accountability?
Well, in the United States, we don't have the same issues with accountability of institutions that at least you're discussing here in Kenya. The Kenyan media is extremely good. These are very, very good journalists and very, very good newspapers, and I'm sometimes jealous of Kenyan newspapers when I say visit St. Louis or San Diego or Chicago or Cleveland that used to have world-class papers and don't anymore. And if they could have a nation or a standard in those cities, they'd be well off. So kudos to, in many ways, Kenyan journalists. You do have issues with institutions. There are trust issues. On the other hand, this is mirrored globally. As you probably all know, this Davos World Economic Forum kicked off in Switzerland this week. It's the annual gathering of world leaders and big thinkers and all that, CEOs. A friend of mine, Richard Edelman of the Edelman Company, the world's biggest PR firm, released a report just yesterday. It was called the Edelman Trust Barometer, and it shows trust in global institutions, the media, government, courts, particularly politicians, falling off a cliff. Now, there's a much greater degree of trust, ironically, among Kenyans, in the Kenyan media and even Kenyan government than there is globally, which is extraordinary. And as I look at the reasons for some of that, I look at the American election, which was highly partisan, and the media was highly partisan, but it was an unbelievably ugly election. And it continues. I mean, there will be protests in Washington this week, and Donald Trump gave his first press conference in, I think, 4 to 6 months, just last week. Well, what were some of the main subjects of conversation? Well, the questions were, did Donald Trump hire prostitutes in Moscow to pee on a bed that President Barack Obama and his wife had slept in some years previously? And there were also these wild allegations that Donald Trump's lawyer had been in Moscow negotiating business deals behind the scenes. And this was all based on a purported intelligence report from a former British senior official in MI6, you know, the British intelligence agency. It turned out to be utterly phony, utterly fake. The lawyer was in San Diego taking his kids to Disney World or some such at the time he was supposed to be in Moscow, and the stamps in his passport proved it. And as for the allegations of the prostitutes, this was just bizarre. Now, I won't go on much longer, but this is really interesting because it's an insight on what could happen in the Kenyan elections. Now, what happened with this in the United States with this particular incident is that there's a group of bloggers that specialize in fake news, and they get paid very, very well for producing this stuff. They produced a report that completely concocted this story about the prostitutes and the visits of the lawyer. The purported British intelligence chief found this, included in some of his analysis as a rumor. It began to gather the credibility of truth. The British intelligence chief passed it to an American senator who hated Donald Trump. The senator in turn passed it to the FBI chief. The FBI chief passed it to the CIA. The CIA included an intelligence report, then leaked it to journalists, and everyone from the New York Times to other newspapers reported this in whole or in part. And the whole thing turned out to be completely phony, completely fake. What does this say about the state of journalism or skepticism or the ability and willingness of journalists to probe deeply in a country that's supposed to have one of the strongest medias in the world? Now, what happens if this kind of fake news phenomenon starts coming to Kenya in a big way? You know, spin has always been a part of politics, has always been a part of media. Relations between reporters and sources, always based on spin. Look at the way the New York Times justified a war in Iraq based on weapons of mass destruction that did not exist.
Right. Yeah, but I mean,
but now this phenomenon is just mushrooming.
Mr. Myers brings in a very important point, and Gathara, just before you speak, Mr. Bwire, this is another aspect of media altogether that is not quite regulated. Bloggers, social media, fake news, most of the time still on social media. How is the MCK planning to go about this?
Thank you. One, the MCK under the Act is only allowed to deal with accredited journalists, people who meet the requirements of the Media Council Act 2013. Right. So largely we don't deal with bloggers and the rest, but there are bloggers who are also journalists. And then we are dealing with all online platforms for registered and subscripted media houses. So Nation, KTN, the rest are regulated by the council. Right. But having said that, remember, online media is being largely dealt with by Communication Authority of Kenya. And there are stringent measures that have been put in place. Obviously, the cybercrime law was pushed back, but that was part of the thinking. But also speaking as a journalist, there's a lot bad shape that is being planned. Obviously, National Cohesion and Integration Act, the cybercrime units of the CID, and related. And obviously, you saw statements from the regulatory body, CK, what they say they're planning to do. And the thinking here is that there will be massive regulation of online media. They're already looking for ways and it's already feared that might happen, the shutdown of online. I mean, though I fear because Uganda did it, Ethiopia did it.
But we did see an article on the Star about a week ago promising Kenyans that there will be no shutdown of social media during the elections.
It might happen, from my gut feeling. It might happen. So that would happen. But what we are saying is that we cannot regulate a channel. There were laws that used to guide. If somebody insults you, even outside of, online, there were laws. So the same laws, defamation laws are still there, and people are in court. Actually, quite a number of people have been sued using the existing. So we don't need extra laws to deal with this, whoever they are inside laws. So, but what we are requesting is responsible use of online platforms. Right. Let people be responsible for what they are doing, because at the end of the day, there will be individual capability. Media houses like KTN, Standard, Nation, the rest have already their social media policies, social media that are guiding their journalists on how they would, both for election unrelated. So we are not worried about that, but obviously there will be cases, 1 or 2 cases where again people will make those mistakes. And necessary action, the Complaints Commission of Media Council is already handling some of those cases. So let people feel free that journalists, bloggers will make mistakes just like anybody will make, but use the existing systems to deal and check with that.
And let's not forget, those mistakes can cost lives.
That's true, but let's use the existing legal system to deal should those cases happen.
Right, and
I think I totally agree with Victor Bwire as far as responsibility is concerned, because it is a very slippery terrain to navigate, whether laws are there or not. Because when you look at Facebook, you know, if it is not actually being monitored closely, some of those things, I think it is very difficult for you to deal with some of the things that are mentioned on Facebook or even Twitter. So when Victor Bwire talks about responsibility, I think that is a message that should sink in Kenyans. But going forward, media spinning is part of the electoral process. That is why when you look at politicians with deep pockets, that's why they hire people like Michelle Ngele to do 1 or 2 things for them in their private capacity. You've seen even right now, a lot of journalists are leaving the newsroom, going into political offices to be part of that media spinning that we are talking about.
Right, I think, you know, Gathara has been wanting to speak for a while on this issue.
Well, I mean, I'll draw a few strands here. I think first, what Mike talks about, what's happened in the U.S. Election, I think for me the reaction to it, the fact that you find companies such as Facebook, Google are being pushed by the market, by individual citizens, not necessarily by laws, you know, to clamp down on things like fake news, is important for us, because we seem to think that it is the law that will solve everything. You know, and we seem to give government, which for me is a big problem, is we give government sort of the leeway to decide what can and cannot be presented. You know, yet government throughout our history, you know, our 50 years of independence and even before, has been the main constraint on democracy, has been the main one that is driving. If you look at violence in 1992, you know, in 97, etc., lots of it linked to the state. You know, so simply telling the state to say, I mean, to dictate what people can and cannot say itself is not going to solve anything. I mean, it's not going to diminish the potentials, I think, for violence. I think there is much more to be done in educating. Actually, I think the media itself, and Media Council here is important in terms of the training it's doing for the media. The media itself should be the check on what is fake news. So it becomes a verifying agent for what news actually is. And it's actually the failure of the mainstream press in the US that has led into this situation where what a guy blogs out tomorrow becomes big, whatever. So I think we need to concentrate much more in what our media is doing, but not from a point of view where the state dictates to it what it can and cannot say, but in building up capacity for the media to stand as an independent witness and a verifier of the news that is credible, that is trusted by people.
And of course, Mr. Meyer, just before you speak, Victor Bwire brings in an entirely new aspect that has not been seen in Kenya before, the possible shutdown of social media during the elections. This happened in Uganda. It happened in Tanzania as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Kenya is a much more sophisticated country and a much more robust democracy. So I don't think that will happen, although, as Victor says, you just never know. I look at this from a slightly different slant. I think we're living in a bit of a new era. Yes, absolutely. Spin is part of politics, always has been, always will be. But we've gone beyond spin. We're going into the realm of made-up stuff. And what's different now is that this can get traction so quickly because of social media and the speed at which reporters have to work. They don't have the same luxury as a reporter did, say, 5 years ago, to really probe skeptically what a politician or someone says. These days, it's become much more he said, she said journalism. If someone out there says, this happened, I saw it with my own eyes, a reporter will often publish that without double checking. Well, I remember in Westgate, I arrived about a month before Westgate, and I wrote a column for the New York Times, a number of them, and I got really badly stung by someone telling a very senior editor of a newspaper who in turn told me that he had seen with his own eyes bodies hanging from meat hooks in the basement of the Nakamat at Westgate. Well, he saw no such thing.
Right.
Another said, I saw people's fingers carved into little points like pencils by the terrorists and forced to write their names on the walls in their own blood. Never happened. Although someone credible told this to me, so I published a bit of this. I got hammered by fake news. Now we're going to see a lot more of this as the pace of the election quickens, as the stakes grow larger, as people's passions are inflamed. So it's incumbent on us as journalists to be more skeptical than we ever have been in the past.
Right, and I totally agree, but I think my fear is that people see government as a solution to this, or the state as a solution to this, where they say that now we need to pass laws that stop people saying certain things, etc. I don't think so. I think really what we need to do is to concentrate on the capacities of both our press, and also the understanding of our audiences, so that they know when something is simply blogged out is not necessarily true because some blogger says this and this happened, And our reporters should be, as you say, much more skeptical when reporting. Lots of the fake news we get, don't forget, doesn't necessarily come from social media, it comes from politicians standing on a podium and announcing stuff that is then reported simply because Raila said it or Uhuru said it,
Right.
Precisely, and we need to get into sort of a mode where we constantly question what they say. Is it actually true? And we report to the best of our knowledge what we know to be true, and where we think there is questions about it, we are actually put it in our stories that actually this might not be true. Not simply saying because Raila said it and then Kenyatta responded, that becomes the issue. That's where we get stuck up. I really think that in building up these capacities within the media, we can actually ameliorate a lot of the damage that might be had by people acting online. But I think also secondly, as Victor said, we need to enforce existing laws, not to go creating new ones when what's already on the books seems ignored. Think of all the cases that have been taken against bloggers, etc. on Facebook. Lots of it is because they said something about a governor, or whatever. But all the haters being spewed on Facebook is not nationally ignored. I mean, most of the time, nothing happens to those people. Right. But it's only when it impinges on a governor or somebody said to have undermined the president, then they find themselves in hot water. This is not the way to enforce the law. It should be enforced across the board. So then people know you can't just go out and tweet something that might be insightful or that might lead to violence. Because there's no consequence, because it doesn't mention Uhuru, it doesn't mention Raila.
But it does mention other people who are just, necessarily just you and me. Right. And of course, there's also the issue of citizen journalism, other than the bloggers and, the fake news. Citizen journalism is also gaining more momentum with people who can post live videos and live pictures, something that we've had CAK, MCK as well try to discourage if it's, say, graphic pictures of bodies and whatnot. But it's something that's also, it's very difficult to get to the bottom of these things, especially when social media provides for anonymous accounts as well. So, Crispus, how would that play out?
I think we must be able to give it up to the role played by citizen journalists, so to speak, because when you look at the media itself, it is far much stretched. Not every media house can be part of the society or can be everywhere in this particular country. We have actually that responsible role that is supposed to be played by the so-called citizen journalists, and they inform actually what makes news, because Michelle Ngele can be able to look at something that has been posted by somebody somewhere in Garissa and you pick out. But now where you draw the line is how you are able to navigate and be able to question that particular footage or that particular statement that has been posted and verify and try to see whether there is something that forms news. And that also happens quite often in terms of even Facebook accounts, what is posted on Facebook or what is posted on these other social media. But going forward, Michelle, I think the media must act responsibly. We are approaching a very critical point in this particular country. And like we have said before on this particular show, we'll be able, or we are looking forward to that responsible journalism that every journalist will be able to stand out and ensure that every law that is within the book is enforced, every law that guides reporters is enforced, so that we can have a better country.
All right, Mr. Meyer, let's get your final word on this as we wind up.
Oh, well, journalists are just great. What would my final word be? I think I'd return to the point of trust and skepticism. I think there's a huge opportunity for media right now. And this, you know, Victor, you're seizing this bull by the horns. You're riding the wave, so to speak. I'm mixing my metaphors. But you see two things. Demand for honest information. People want to know, and they don't want to be told tales. They want someone who's going to separate truth from fiction. You know, at least not perfectly, not without your own point of view, but an effort at it, so that they trust you. If they trust what you write, this election will be a superior election. If they can trust to some degree what politicians say, well, that will depend on how well we cover what they say, okay? It's fact-checking in many ways. It's skepticism. It's not always objectivity, but it's a probing, balanced approach to what's being said and what's happening. And if we in the media can offer that to our readers, we're going to see a huge surge in both trust and readership. The New York Times, interestingly enough, so did the Washington Post, both experienced massive surges in subscriptions and readership during this election, in part because they distinguished themselves with the quality of their election coverage. I don't see any reason why the Nation and the Standard and the Star and the various networks can't do the same and benefit commensurately.
Victor.
Thank you. I like what Prof is saying, because what we are encouraging media is not to allow laws made elsewhere to guide their work. We need journalists to be active, because the spirit of self-regulation requires that we be active. So we are thinking of forming a council of governors or a media working group that will bring veterans, active, and journalists who will give guidance in addition to what is happening. So that is happening, so we will be forming a media working group or a council of elders, whatever they will call the name, but just a network of all journalists, senior and current, so that it helps in bringing some of these discussions or helping journalists make a common position on some issues. Because journalists we are disorganized right now, and everybody speaks on behalf of journalists. And so EDSAR Guild, Kenya Union of Journalists, and AMWIC and the rest are reforming, regrouping, so that we have a very strong network of journalists and to help. So that will happen. Two, we are encouraging journalists to do detailed factual reporting instead of breaking news. So that's something we are pushing editors, and we have had already discussion about detailed factual news instead of breaking news. We can't compete. And that's what makes journalists different from others. So that's already happening. Now, the issue of tallying and the rest, while the law only requires the Electoral Management Board, that is the IEBC, to release elections, but that does not, does not stop journalists, media houses from doing tallying and doing comparison, because that then will help us in the interpretation and interpretative journalism that we are requiring. But officially, it's only IEBC that is required to tally and release results for any. But that does not stop, because it is also a historical record. And when people are now start asking, like you mentioned what SK Machara said, then where is this data that we do a comparison against this, because it can help even in legal or just studies like what at the Aga Khan University, and people say this is, because these are the lessons learned. We are behaving as if we are doing elections for the first time. There are lessons learned in 2007, there are lessons learned in 2000. Where are these lessons? What worked that we can continue with, and what did not work that we can? But we behave every election like
it's
we
new.
have just started, nothing. So we are encouraging people to have these historical records, but there's room for improvement. What I'm saying that like Prof said, if we are going to do factual, detailed journalism is there to stay. The last but not least is to caution our colleagues journalists that within the election period, there would be a lot of court cases. So be aware of fake news. Somebody would come make wild allegation again as an opponent, and make sure you verify, and verify.
Right.
Because they are going, a lot of our media houses are going through serious legal cases in courts. And if they are going to pay those damages, many of them will close down. We need to caution against that.
Thank you so much. Victor Bwire, Patrick Gathara, Crispus Yankem, and Michael Meyer. Many thanks for joining us on a newsroom chat this morning as we discuss the role of the media in the electoral process and the upcoming August 8th elections. We take a short break here on Morning Express. For those on our KTN Home channel, Life and Style is up next. But for those on KTN News, we'll be back with the news highlights for the hour. And we'll also be focusing on your health as we focus this morning on prostate cancer. We'll be right back.